You're listening to your host and psychotherapist Rhonda Spaziani on Spaz on Mental Health on greeninkradio.com.
Are you listening? He just repeated the words that came out of her mouth. Now they're listening.
Hi, this is Rhonda, and today's episode is The Therapists Go Marching One by One. So last episode we talked about what is psychological abnormality, and we concluded that the gold standard is the 4 Ds. Does it meet the 4 Ds? Does it have deviance, distress, dysfunction, and danger associated with it? And that abnormal behavior is maladaptive, so that it's not whether society accepts it, but whether it fosters the well-being of the individual and of the group to which that person belongs. And well-being is not only maintenance and survival, but also includes growth and fulfillment. There are basically 3 classifications of models. So now you know that something's going on, and now, for instance, you're going to look to find a therapist. So you go on Psychology Today, and you want to see what is their theory, what do they ascribe to, what is their philosophy and their approach. And so you look on Psychology Today to see what they say they are. It falls into 3 broad categories: the psychological, the biological, and then the community, social, cultural, and family influences. So if we start with the psychological, they believe that our early years are very important in our creation of abnormal behavior. So it could be stuff like maternal deprivation, separation from mother or parents, lack of warmth and stimulation, a faulty parent-child relationship like rejection, overprotection, maybe even over-permissiveness, faulty discipline, maladaptive family structures. They could be inadequate or disturbed family, and stress. The biological model is just basically considered a medical model. This perspective treats psychological abnormality as an illness brought on by malfunctioning parts of your body, the organism. And so they believe that it's either brain chemistry creating abnormal behavior, or it is brain anatomy, circuitry, also can impact abnormal behavior as well. So the brain chemical component is about all the neurotransmitters, and they release neurons in our brain, release neurotransmitters, and they're electrochemical little messengers. And so if that's not working right, there's 100 different neurotransmitters that include things like serotonin, dopamine, and GABA. And if there's abnormal activity in certain neurotransmitters, it can lead to specific mental disorders. For example, depression's been linked to low levels of serotonin, norepinephrine, and glutamate. They've also even found that psychological disorders are sometimes related to abnormal chemical activity in the endocrine system. So again, hormones are chemical messengers released by the endocrine glands that propel our body organs into action, and abnormal secretions of these hormones have been linked to psychological disorders. For example, cortisol release is related to anxiety and mood disorders. And more, they're connecting these brain networks as playing a role in abnormal behavior. So a brain circuit is a network of brain structures that work together to produce a behavioral, emotional, or cognitive response. A number of factors can result in the malfunctioning of brain structures, circuits, or neural communication. So biological abnormalities are sometimes the result of genetic inheritance, evolution, or viral infections. Prenatal and childhood viruses they found may be linked to schizophrenia, anxiety, and mood disorders. The biological treatments focus on drug therapies. There's 4 main groups: anti-anxiety drugs, antidepressant drugs, antibipolar drugs, and antipsychotic drugs. And these help decrease confusion, hallucinations, delusions by 70 to 90% effectiveness. You notice there's all 4 are anti. Another biological approach is brain stimulation. ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, and it is indicated for really severe depression. There's also psychosurgery. Think of that old trephination where they bore through the head. Now there's such a thing that was originated in the 1930s, a lobotomy, where they cut through regions of the brain. One current form of psychosurgery is deep brain stimulation. It involves implanting a stimulating electrode in specific brain regions to try to ameliorate certain psychological disorders. The psychological models include the psychodynamic, behavioral, cognitive, and humanistic existential models. And the psychodynamic model is the oldest of the psychological models and the most famous of all the modern psychological models. And that was created by Sigmund Freud. And his model was psychoanalysis. And he believed that 3 central forces shape our personality: the id, the ego, and the superego. And he thought that abnormal behavior is a symbolic expression of all these unconscious, buried mental conflicts that can be generally traced to early childhood or infancy and not getting our needs met or wants met. And for a therapeutic approach, psychodynamic therapists use free association, resistance, dream interpretation, and catharsis as some mechanisms for change. Clinicians that were a little bit frustrated by the psychodynamic approach began to look at behavior, and so then the behavioral model was created. And this particular model states that both normal and abnormal behaviors are learned, and psychological disorders are the result of learning maladaptive ways of behaving. And it concentrates on behaviors that are learned through conditioning and proposes that what has been learned can be unlearned. So it's a little more positive. Learning can take place by classical conditioning. So if you think back, that's the temporal association in which two events repeatedly occur close together in time to elicit a response. And operant conditioning is behavior followed by a reward or a punishment. And social learning is learning by imitating others' behavior or modeling. These three types of conditioning account for behavior, and it can be adaptive or maladaptive. You often see behavioral modifications in institutions for small children. They give them rewards for behavior, and they guide the behavior and shape the behavior by rewarding them for positive behavior rather than punishment. That's less looked favorably upon now. And then clinicians began to see this strict behavioral model as a little too simplistic and created the cognitive model. And that was next. Cognitive therapists argue that people with psychological disorders can overcome their problems by developing new, more functional ways of thinking, and abnormal behavior and functioning can result from these cognitive problems. People may hold assumptions and attitudes about themselves that are irrational and inaccurate. These faulty assumptions and attitudes and illogical thinking processes can be guided to believe and change thoughts, do some thought changing to a more productive, more positive way of thinking. And then that didn't seem to be comprehensive enough in and of itself, and their two models were married together, the cognitive behavioral model. And this model focuses on the thoughts and behaviors associated with psychopathology. And cognitive behavioral theorists and therapists combine both cognitive and behavioral components in their explanations and treatments of disordered behavior. And new wave cognitive behavioral therapies like ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, or MBCT, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, don't make people wrestle their sticky thoughts or intrusive thoughts to the ground. They allow people to let them pass through non-judgmentally and accept them, but not connect to them. And the last psychological model is the humanistic existential model, and this focuses on all the broader aspects of human existence. Humanists believe that human beings are born with a natural tendency to be friendly, cooperative, constructive, and are driven to self-actualize. And existentialists believe that from birth we have total freedom to give meaning to our existence or to avoid that responsibility. And those who shirk from this responsibility often live empty, inauthentic, and dysfunctional lives. And this model, Carl Rogers comes to mind. He was a big player in this. And the humanistic model emphasized people as friendly and cooperative, and the existential model places an emphasis on self-determination, choice, and individual responsibility. The focus is really on authenticity. Carl Rogers developed a client-centered therapy that was very helpful. And there's also, we must mention, Gestalt theory and therapy by Fritz Perls. And this goal of that theory of a humanistic model is to achieve client self-recognition through patient challenging. They do some skillful frustration, role-playing, and Gestalt therapy. And then I must mention that spiritual views are more and more being addressed in therapy, that they find that spirituality is correlated with mental health. So now the field of psychology does really emphasize the importance of having a spiritual component in your life, your overall wellness program. And the last model, that is the social cultural model or community-based models, are the social cultural model. In that model, abnormal behavior is best understood in light of the social and cultural forces that influence an individual. So our behavior is always shaped by societal forces, factors such as family structure and communication, our social networks, even societal conditions and labels and roles become very important. And it's even been found that certain family systems are more likely to produce abnormal functioning in individual members, like if the family's enmeshed, in which the members are really over-involved in everyone's activities, so that people don't lead independent, productive lives outside of the family. And social networks in which people operate include their social and professional relationships as well. And the family, social, and multicultural perspectives are a big component of some of these models. And it's grounded in family system theory, and abnormal functioning within a family leads to abnormal behavior in its member. In the more community-based models, what might play in as a treatment is group therapies, self-help groups, support groups, family therapy, couple therapy, community treatment, addressing issues within the community. And culturally diverse psychology is a growing field of study, and multicultural therapists seek to understand how culture, race, ethnicity, gender, and similar factors affect our behavior and thoughts, and how people of different cultures, races, and genders differ psychologically. And we are looking to always have greater sensitivity to cultural issues across all therapy modalities. As no one of these models have proven consistently superior, perhaps because multiple factors play a role in the development of psychological disorders, so a one-stop shop doesn't really hit it across all categories. And because no one model covers it all, now about 22% of the therapists are considered eclectic and integrate components of several approaches or theories in their practice. And psychodynamic, believe it or not, still has a pretty good population of 18%. Cognitive therapy is around 31%. Behavioral is around 15%. But if you combine cognitive behavioral, that's really still the dominant therapeutic modality, around 50% of therapists. Humanistic and existential and sociocultural, multicultural, and family therapies are smaller percentages in the 1 to 4% around. So now you have a basis of now who do I want to go see for if I want to go get some support or send a family member or a friend. And when you go on Psychology Today, you'll have a better understanding. But more and more therapists on Psychology Today or on their websites are listing themselves as eclectic or holistic because they're incorporating and kind of picking the best from the models to incorporate it into their approaches. So it's not a one-stop shop. They adjust their approach to the specificity and the needs of each client. So wishing you the best today and all days. And this podcast, as all podcasts are on Green Ink Radio, is supported and sponsored by Green Ink Marketing Communications. You can find them at greenink.us.com. They bring your stories to life.
Music provided by Immunuri. Check them out at imunuri.com. Thanks for listening to Spaz on Mental Health. Tune into greeninkradio.com to listen to other great shows hosted by a collective of imperfect gurus. greeninkradio.com, an experience for the curious mind.